Okay, so welcome to the Metal3 community meeting. Today is Wednesday, 24th of June. Let's jump right in, and I will share my screen now. Okay, so let's get started. We usually get start with an introduction round, but I don't think we have anybody new on the call, do we? Or anybody who wants to introduce themselves?
Yeah, I'm John Terpstra. I'm with Dell in Austin, Texas, and I'm new to this call. I missed the last one because of the change of meeting tool, but that's okay. I look forward to participating here.
Okay, great. Welcome, John. Okay, let's then go on. I don't think we have any demos for today, so we can just skip this item, and let's go directly to discuss about the actual meeting place changed, basically. So, well, you've got the message that we now are having the meeting on Teams. The reason for that is that Ericsson canceled all their Zoom accounts for some problem of trust with the company. So we had to find another solution because apparently in the community we do not have another paid account that we could have used for this meeting. So that's why now we are having the meeting in Teams. Otherwise we would have this limitation of 40 minutes on Zoom. So we were considering other alternatives like Jitsi, but Jitsi was unfortunately unreliable with the recording. So we couldn't get it properly started whenever we wanted it, and the quality was a bit lower. So that's why we decided to give a try with Teams. Sorry. The question now would be actually what do you think of that? Is it okay for you to use Teams? Are you having some issues, I don't know, with the client, with the browser, or so? Basically, should we look for another solution for the next meeting, or should we keep having the meetings here?
I think it's fine. Yeah, Teams is great. Joining was pretty easy, especially as guests. So I'd say we can stick to Teams for now.
Okay, great, thank you. Is there somebody who?
No problem.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Is there somebody who would be on the opposite opinion? That had any? Well, actually, if someone had an issue to join, they probably wouldn't be here right now. So we're anyways going to send a message further on the mailing list and on the on site to check with people that if there's anybody opposed to keeping it here for now, and hopefully when the project, if it is accepted as an CNCF sandbox project, we might be able to leverage the CNCF accounts in Zoom to come back to Zoom. Let's hope so. Okay, is there any comment on this point, or should we just move to the next? Okay.
No.
Good, thanks. The next point then is this backwards compatibility for CAPM3. So basically with CAPM3 v1 alpha 4, we have introduced a lot of new CRDs and some non-backwards compatible changes that require the version conversion, basically. Right now, the current state of v1 alpha 4 is getting pretty good. We are thinking about releasing. So we're thinking to set from now on a backwards compatibility requirement on the v1 alpha 4 to prepare for the release process, to make sure that whatever comes in now will be backwards compatible with whatever is now in in the master branch. And any non-backwards compatible change that we haven't identified any right now on the roadmap for the coming changes. So those non-compatible changes would then be postponed to a V1 Alpha 5 release later on. So same thing here. Like I would like to hear if there's anybody opposed to that. And otherwise, if everybody's fine with it, we'll probably be like applying it from now on. Okay, then I take that there is nobody to oppose to this to this requirement. Good. And the next point is also from me actually. The ironic authentication design proposal was already now has been up for a couple of weeks, and it has well, there hasn't been much feedback whether it was on the Google Docs or on the design proposal PR itself. So the lazy consensus that has been proposed is now by the end of the week. So if you haven't yet reviewed, or if you have some comments or something, please add it before then. Then we'll see by the end of the week if it needs more time or if we get it in beginning of next week. Is there any other topics that you would want to discuss right now that is not on the agenda?
Question on the authentication proposal. Where do we find the links to that?
Oh yeah, sure. Sorry,
I'm going to. Is it appropriate for us to discuss that here at this time, or how do we handle it?
Of course, it is any kind of discussion topic within the community is in scope of this meeting. So it's great. Just feel free to ask questions or comments on it. This is great. Oh, actually, that was the docs, and this is the PR.
Cool. Could we perhaps have a quick walk through those, if you don't mind?
Sure. So basically, the main idea is to add MTLS into the ironic setup, because right now the setup that we have doesn't have any authentication, meaning that anything that has access to the network where you have the ironic running can actually just interact with ironic as long as you know the IP address. It can interact with ironic and control your deployment. So this is highly problematic, considering that your target cluster, all the nodes have a physical access to that network because that's where they boot from. And it means that all the pods running there can have their traffic routed to that network and can access ironic. So the idea behind this authentication proposal is to add MTLS so that you have a certificate-based authentication on both sides. Both the server and the clients. So actually the drawing is not visible in there, but more like this. So basically we have two components that need this authentication, Ironic and Ironic Inspector. Right now they work like standalone. So you just start it's a Python, you just start the process and you're good to go. So the proposal is to modify it so that it runs with WSGI behind Apache. And Apache would then be the one taking care of the HTTPS, so serving encrypted traffic and authenticating the client. So all clients, for example, the CLI or BMO, they would use the authenticated endpoints. So anything that is behind /v1/ something. But there are exceptions because IPA cannot use certificates to authenticate itself, because it's an image that would then need to have the certificates baked in for every single deployment that you're doing. So it doesn't really, it's not very usable this way. So the idea is to leave the /v1/lookup and /v1/heartbeat unauthenticated, knowing that IPA actually has a token to when it's talking to Ironic or Ironic Inspector. So there is a kind of a mechanism to make sure that there is no spoofing of the IPA, because like you need that token. So as long as you're behind HTTPS, it's also somehow authenticated. Then there still needs to be like some kind of communication between Ironic and Ironic Inspector, and that could be over the loopback interface, where there would actually be no authentication requirements. So just different virtual hosts.
Was any consideration given to using OAuth 2 with a configurable backend, or is that considered too complex?
Yeah, it's a bit too complex for what we are trying to achieve. It's the same way that we could use also Keystone, right, for authenticating the clients, and like whether it's BMO or the OpenStack CLI. But it requires additional components, while this MTLS solution just requires to have a cert manager that will take care of generating the certificate and rotating them when they come close to expiring. There is actually a section about the alternatives in the proposal. Sorry, there, alternatives. So there is an existing basic authentication mechanism in place in Ironic. So if we have that behind HTTPS, that could be sufficient. But it's not as secure that using something like MTLS. So that's why we prefer to go with the MTLS approach. Another solution would be like to use Keystone, but that's once again like far too heavy and complex for the goal. Like we still want to, well, we want a secure deployment, but we don't want the complexity that brings Keystone, or in that case, if we have an OAuth backend, like maybe we need a key cloak or something, whatever to use that. So yeah, that's the reason why we are preferring at the moment MTLS. But of course, if you have some arguments in favor of one or the other, please feel free to comment on the PR. We are welcoming any feedback there.
Well, let's discuss verbally here for a moment, if I may.
Sure.
The Redfish project, and Redfish being one of the key components that we would anticipate Ironic interfacing to, the Redfish community through the DMTF are in the process of reviewing authentication options for Redfish itself and for devices that implement Redfish. And I think it would be highly advantageous if through Ironic we support the same basic interface and the same basic technology, just for consistency purposes. Now, the proposal that is on the table there, or potentially coming onto the table, is to use OAuth and to allow for the use of an OIDC backend. I'm just wondering what other thoughts are on that. Is that really making things too complicated, or is it worth considering that from a unified perspective?
So it means that then you would already have a backend, right? Because your Redfish like capable BMCs would use that like whatever OIDC solution that is already in place.
That
right?
is certainly anticipated, yes.
Okay, then actually like the complexity is not as much as like, because yeah, you don't need to deploy this backend by yourself. Like it was like the issue with this Keystone and the point about the complexity was that you have to actually manage that backend yourself. But in the case that you have already an existing backend in your infrastructure, then I guess it wouldn't be too complex to modify the Apache virtual host to take this OAuth too. So that could be actually an extension to this work, to have a another
as an option.
Yeah, exactly. So we could have two or three even mechanisms, because the basic authentication would be also very easy to support.
So that would then make it implementation dependent rather than cooked in.
Probably not implementation dependent. We could even have it so that it's just an environment variable that you give when starting your, like when you create your pod. You could say like which backend you want to use, or which let's say like which authentication mechanism you want to use, and then depending on that, because the idea is to render the virtual host configuration with Jinja 2 based on the environment variables, so that like if you're given a CA, then you would maybe like use that one for the MTLS. If you're not given anything, you just go with plain HTTP. So we could also add like parameters that, for example, like use OAuth2 and then give the backend URL like the OIDC endpoint.
Right.
The same way.
Yep.
Actually, yeah, that could be interesting. I would be interested to know like what's where is this proposal on the DMTF? Like is it?
This has yet to be made, as I understand it. There is a request for submissions of proposals, and I believe that OAuth 2 is probably going to be the most most popular proposal. It's to be seen. We don't know yet.
Okay. The only kind of like drawback that I can think about of using this OAuth2 is that then you need to have a user management that is separated from like when you deploy basically the BMO and the Ironic, you need already to have that user management in place. So like you have created the user on your IDC backend for BMO or something like this.
Yeah, I guess that depends on how we're deploying Metal3 and Ironic, doesn't it?
Yeah. The way they are deploying now, like they're basically coming more or less together. So that's why like not having to manage the users is great, because they just talk to each other and that's it. But yeah, like if there are other people in the picture, like some users that have an OpenStack CLI or something, maybe having the OAuth2 there would allow an easy management of the actual physical users that connect to Ironic.
So I'm anticipating that Metal3 and Ironic will find use well outside of an OpenStack framework and will find ready adoption in the Kubernetes community and potentially in other outside in external software-defined infrastructure management systems. So clearly a default needs to be provided, but perhaps a configurable alternative to that default.
Yeah, so usually how it works is like when this kind of ID comes up, we create an issue in the Metal3 docs repository. So like if you don't mind like creating something to ask for an extension of the authentication mechanisms there, then we will tackle it like when it comes, like when it's a bit more ready on probably on the DMTF side, and
yeah, I think so. Thank you.
Tackle it a bit later.
Yep.
Yeah. We need like to see a bit more right now, like how this whole running behind Apache, running behind Apache, and the impact that it has on Metal3 dev needs a bit more work before like going into like this adding alternative mechanisms.
Yeah, I concur with that. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to go over this.
Yeah, no problem. You're welcome. Thanks for the idea.
Hi, Mail. This is Sudeep Batra.
Hi.
Yeah, so I'm in favor of that, additional authentication mechanism with OIDC backend provider. And I think we observe that OIDC provider option is more and more available in many other components as well. But just trying to understand, like in this case, compared to the CERT manager, what additional benefit will it have to have the OIDC provider, considering that Ironic is like this BMO is more internal and we won't be needing a lot of user account for this authentication, isn't it so?
Yes, so basically the use case I can see for having an OIDC backend is not that much towards like Ironic, towards BMO, because like we could even have a BMO talk directly to Ironic via its own channel with MTLS, but it's more like probably for the user management. That like who do you allow to access your Ironic instance and have a fine-grained management of those users? That would be like any kind of I don't know, like engineer at your site or like whoever basically, but you can finely tune who has access to which Ironic instance in your cluster and what they can do with that.
So this will be like a additional check, like who is allowed to use the Ironic API to like interact with additional machines, provisioning, things like that.
Yeah, I could really see it as a mechanism to authenticate like people who want to directly interact with Ironic, not through BMO.
I think that the principal requirement here may be for use with Kubernetes and bare metal deployment, where users are given administrative rights over the bare metal machines, and some infrastructure management teams may want to be more restrictive there and use an appropriate OIDC connector to exercise a second layer of control, since it is bare metal that is being exposed.
Oh, wait, sorry, now I'm confused. So you're saying that the layer of management that you want to have is towards the hardware or towards the Ironic? I'm not getting that. Sorry.
Have a common authentication backend for both hardware control through Redfish and through Ironic and through Metal3 and also in Kubernetes. So have a consistent authentication and control mechanism. Kubernetes already has its own RBAC that is quite flexible. So having a consistency through the whole plane, I believe, would be a positive feature from organizations that are looking to adopt this, particularly when they are security conscious.
So just for my information to understand a bit better, like what you're proposing. So would you see it so that like it would be the user, like the user credential, like would be logged in this OIDC, and then create the CR, the BMH CR, and whatever interacts with it, and then it would still be the same, like somehow tied to the same user, all through like Ironic and then the BMC, or are we still like talking about like creating like a user for BMO and then a user for Ironic to be able to log on each of the BMC and the Redfish endpoints?
I don't know. I'm looking for points of flexibility here, and additionally making certain that organizations that have so-called a checkbox on a consistent authentication backend for all components of their infrastructure have an easy checkbox, no matter how they deploy Ironic, no matter how they deploy Metal3, no matter how they deploy the higher layer applications like Kubernetes that may consume those tools.
Okay. Well, we can definitely take this discussion further, probably with a bit more people, like over pull requests, so that then there is some written down, like traces of the discussion.
Yeah, I think we may want to take this in the direction you suggested. Wait until we get more feedback from the DMTF, because if that does not happen, if OAuth 2 does not happen as part of the standard proposed by DMTF, then this becomes a moot point, I feel.
Mm. Yeah, but still a very nice theoretical discussion.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the strong point is that consistent backend that is definitely desirable for many organizational implementation. For example, AT&T perspective, I think it is going to be very much desirable to have a single OIDC backend for all the authentication point. So I do think this is very important to have. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a much better starting point for this, like John said earlier, would be through Redfish, through Ironic, and then into Metal3. Because I think that's how it would make the most sense. Because looking at the typical use case of Metal Cube is BMO being operated by CAPM3, which then operating Ironic. So things are pretty much automated and tied in. And in that case, authentication has to go step by step. That's how I see it. I mean, having user accounts between CAPM3 and BMO and Ironic would be, I mean, in a typical case would be much of a hassle, at least in setting things up, because things are basically just tied in. You don't need many user accounts to manage BMO through CAPM3. You just want basic connectivity between them through any, control mechanism between the resources.
Yeah, and also considering the fact that the BM, like CAPM3 and the Metal operator and all that, they basically communicate through the CRs. So it's they mostly authenticate themselves towards the Ironic, the Kubernetes API. So with the like token that they have, like the service account. So in that case, if we want to use OAuth 2 everywhere, then it also needs to be used as an authentication mechanism for the Kubernetes layer itself.
In that case, Mail, can we have one wrapper in between OpenStack and Kubernetes where we can implement the one IDC, which will take care of both the authentication, and it's a single point authentication instead of talking to multiple?
So do I understand correctly that you're proposing to add something in between BMO here and the Ironic? That so right. BMO would talk unauthenticated to that endpoint that would then authenticate towards Ironic.
Right.
Yeah, that would be a way to do it if we don't have directly the support of OAuth 2 in BMO at that point.
Correct. Yeah, and this will be easier for users.
You see, I also think that. Yeah, go ahead.
This is easier approach for user also, end user, because that way, anyway, if for user point of view, this is most welcome approach if we do that way.
If you do it that way, then you probably also would be losing the granularity for the user's authentication, because they would all go to the same endpoint that would then be authenticated as just one.
Okay.
My opinion was more like, since BMO and Metal Cube essentially work as an operator of Ironic itself. So it would make more sense if this change or adaptation of OIDC or whatever would start from Ironic, and then Metal3 would support it as a feature update. Because otherwise things could get complicated if we want to be wrapping around Ironic for some reason, and then Ironic could change its mechanisms, and that could get tricky.
Yes, definitely.
But relying completely on Ironic, I think we should think our own solution, authentication solution for BMO itself. Because if someone wants to use BMO for its like bare metal crowd in the future, in that case, that will be the easy pick for the user. I think we should think in that direction.
That mechanism is actually already in place. It's the RBAC from Kubernetes, because the user has to have the permissions to interact with the BMH CRs.
Okay.
So whether we're talking about directly interaction with the BMH, then in that case the user, when doing like kubectl whatever, needs to have the permissions to modify the BMH, or create it or delete it or whatever. But if we're talking about like using it in the context of cluster API, then it's the cluster API provider Metal3 that needs to have the proper access to the bare metal host CRs, because in that case it's the cluster API provider Metal3 that actually does the modifications of the BMH CR. So one way or another, it's anyways controlled by the Kubernetes RBAC, basically.
Okay. Okay, in both the cases, we are using RBAC. Okay.
Yes, and even if you're using the CAPI way, and then in that case, it's the cluster API provider Metal3 controller that needs to have the access to the BMH. The user would be then the one creating the cluster CR and the Metal3 machine CR and all this. He also needs to have access in the RBAC for creating and modifying those resources, whether it's like a cluster Metal3 cluster or machine Metal3 machine deployment, machine set. All this is also controlled through the Kubernetes RBAC.
Okay. So currently, Ironic is, I think, standalone service running inside Metal3 on one of the pod. If you want to rely on external Ironic service, then Ironic will have its own keystone-based authentication. So I think that's where problem arises. So
yes, if you're not using a BMO that is using no auth configuration, then you will have problem with BMO, because BMO, as far as I know at the moment, doesn't support keystone authentication.
Correct.
But that is also something that we could add as an alternative mechanism. Like we could also add support for keystone, because it's at the end we're using Gopher Cloud, and Gopher Cloud has all support for authentication through keystone. It's just a matter of using it properly.
Maybe we should open a issue ticket.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, open it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Appreciated that discussion. Thank you.
No problem. This meeting is here for that, this kind of discussion. Then
Thanks
if there's
for bringing this, John. This is really helpful.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Thanks for bringing this. This is much needed.
Pleasure.
Okay, then let's move back to the agenda if there's no further comments on this. Digambar, you have the next point.
Yeah, I think Hemchar PR is currently outstanding since long, so it will be good. I think it's all look. I think someone. I think you are also not a owner, so someone of the owner. We also added that owner, but somehow he's not looking at it. Can we get this done as early as possible? Because we have one dependency on the airship side based on this.
Yeah, for this probably you should talk with Russell, I think, because he has the other one that has the owner rights there, right?
Yeah.
So you should talk with him probably.
Okay, I'll open a conversation with him on Slack. Yeah.
Because him and the other guy, I forgot the name, they are the only ones who can get your PR in.
Okay. Okay. Sure. Thank you.
No problem. Is there any other topic that should be added to the agenda before we move to the issue triage?
Yeah, hi, Mail, Sudeep again. Yeah, actually, I was having one discussion around how to handle the OS upgrades, operating system upgrades of the machine. So, do you think, yeah, OS upgrade and kernel patch updates?
Okay. So do you want some kind of discussion on how it's done now with this immutable approach, or would you are you rather looking for something else?
Yeah, exactly. Like how it can be handled seamlessly via the bare metal operator is what I was thinking. Like, if you have any thoughts around it, like, do we need to do any enhancement on the bare metal operator to handle this? You know.
Sure, we can discuss this. If I don't know if there's anybody who wants to take this question.
I have some ideas here. My first question is how you would do this on a system that was not bare metal. Managing the operating system feels like something that once you have the host up is out of scope of the main underlying tool and is something that should be orchestrated at a higher level, right?
Yeah, I mean, we are managing all the bare metal machines through the bare metal operator itself, right? So I am basically wondering that, when we want to do the upgrade or kernel patch, that will also be handled via the bare metal operator.
Yeah, and this can can be done in the way it is. Well, let's talk in the CAPI context in general. The idea would be that basically you have an image, right, that you're using to deploy, and that image contains already the OS that you want. So if you would have a kernel patch or something that you want to apply, you would be regenerating, creating a new image that contains all those updated elements, and then update your CRs, your cluster API CRs to instruct CAPI to use the new images instead of the old one, and then it would roll out a new a new set of nodes that would be using this new image, while the nodes that are using the old image from your previous deployment are one by one getting rolled out, basically.
Correct, right. Yeah. So that's right. I think it can be handled that way. However, what will happen to the the workloads which are running on those machines, I mean, can we have some mechanism to, ensure that the workloads do not get impacted, or I mean, they have to be like picked out from those nodes, and we cannot guarantee the workload.
So basically what will happen, like it's a mechanism in Cluster API, is that the node will be drained before being like deleted. So all the workload should be then rescheduled in the nodes that are either the remaining nodes or the new nodes that have been added to the cluster. So your workload obviously needs to tolerate this kind of things and be like reliable enough so that like you can just like kill it on one node and then it's going to be rescheduled in another one.
But like, do you think anything here needs to be supported on the bare metal side, bare metal operator VMO side, or this is all handled from the upper layer at the CAPI layer itself?
You should be handling that on the upper layer, because if you handle that on the lower layer, like you could do it, just modify the image in field in your BMH CR, right? So you could do that just to get the new image running. But the problem is that then you have no way to ensure that the synchronization and how is this going to be applied. You need to do it everything manually. While if you do it at the higher layer, with Cluster API, for example, then like you do it in a machine deployment, for example, then you have those control that this max surge and max unavailable that allow you to define, I want to have maximum like 3 nodes at once, for example, that would be getting replaced. So 3 unavailable nodes, for example, and then like you put a max surge of 3 so that you can have like 3 additional nodes created during this deployment.
Okay.
So all this logic is already existing in CAPI. That's why, like personally, I would highly recommend to use the CAPI mechanisms, because otherwise you would need to, if you want to do that at a lower layer, you need to re-implement this by yourself.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. And that is specifically true regarding the cluster, the KCP, this kubeADM control plane, because the KCP has a lot of logic to manage the stashed etcd. So if you don't use the like KCP mechanism itself, then you would need to yourself handle the etcd operations that need to be done to keep your working cluster.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mel.
Yeah. No problem. Maybe I'll just put here like recommended ways via CAPI.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to see a clash introduced by having 2 layers that manage this. CAPI is the appropriate level. So thank you.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the discussion. Any other topic that you would want to add to the agenda before we go to the triage? Any other discussion? Then I'll take this as a no. let's move on to the triage. I don't know if Stefan is usually taking care of that if he's on the call, or yeah, can't really, like the initial things are not easy to read. So okay, well, there's anyways like only 4 new issues that need to be classified. So let's start with this one. Helm chart for hardware classification controller. Any idea? Labels and timeline?
Hi, Mail Sumit here. I mean, this was the same PR Digambar was talking about that we have already raised, but there is like, I think it has not got any reviews. So you can add label from that perspective, needs reviewer kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't think we have this.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, yeah, because it's okay. You can say the feature, but because we have a tag Russell in this commit, and some OGL book. I mean, that is a user ID. We do not know what name is. So we have added both of the parties. If you can go to that PR.
Yeah, we've seen that. It's just waiting for review.
Okay.
It's just that we need to put a label here so that it doesn't appear as a new issue every time.
Right.
So yeah. I won't put a timeline because it's already being worked on. So there's no need to classify it.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, let's then go to the next one. The IPMI tool PXE bug. Yeah, so the problem with this one is, so when you run Ironic, you might have already seen that there is a lot of logs that say that IPMI tool command has failed. So the suggested solution here was to add this use IPMI tools retry to true in the configuration. So I originally it was in Metal3 devenv, so I transferred it here because it's an Ironic configuration problem, and reopened it for discussion with the community. So I'm just going to add maybe what would be a good label for this. Well, a kind of bug, but probably priority backlog for now, because it's actually not an actual failure. Like your log will be full of this, but the Ironic still works properly under the hood. Yeah. Okay, then let's go to the next. So this was a request for documentation. Yes, very good. We can also put this one could be like help wanted and good first issue, like because it would help to get familiar with like how things are going in Metal3. And the timeline. Well, important long term soon. I don't know. Well, let's put it soon.
Okay, soon we do not know what soon.
Okay, next one. Oh yeah, this is from Anwar. So the idea is that when we now we're deploying with cluster_ctl in Metal3 devenv when we do the tests of the cluster. So we use we basically set the Metal3 provider to be at specific release that is configurable, but the rest is not configurable. Like you cannot configure which CAPI release you're going to run with. You're just going to end up with the latest one. So this is to change it to put it to make it configurable. Maybe I would put this as a feature and important soon also. Okay, and that was the last one of the issues. So we are done with the triage, and if I'm going to ask for a last time, if anybody wants to discuss something more, otherwise we're going to close the meeting.
Nope, I think that's it. Thanks.
Great, then thank you all for joining and have a nice day. We'll post the recordings on YouTube as usual after the meeting.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mel. Bye-bye.